Hi, I'm Jordan, and board games typically come in boxes. Oh, and if they don't, that's usually a problem. But most games are, some of the best games, of course, like one of the best size boxes is this Ticket to Ride size box. It's just a big old square, fits nice in all of your Calyx shelves. We have the kind of Euro style rectangle. It just kind of fits like a book on your shelf, which is really nice. There's like these little card games that kind of slot the cards in there. Those are nice too. But I think one of my favorite size boxes is this little square from, like Lost Cities, this Cosmos two-player line box. And I think a game that comes in this size box, to me, feels like it's probably going to be, it has a good chance of being a really good game. And I don't know what it is about this size box, but it works really well. And I just wanted to talk about games that happen to come in this size box. They're not really related at all, but they happen to be in the same size box, and I thought I would talk about those. So my number 10 game of games that happen to come in a size box that's like Lost Cities is a game that was also in the Cosmos 2-player line. This is called Dragonheart. And this is a game from Rudiger Dorn in which you're playing cards on this shared board. It's a two-player game. You're playing it back and forth between the two of you. And you have the shared board, and the board has different slots on it that you're going to be putting these different types of cards. They're kind of fantasy-type characters. You got some dwarves and dragons and archers and knights and things like that. And you're placing them on these boards and on this board, and there's arrows pointing. And so depending on, if you play an archer, it's pointing up to the dragons, then you get to take all the dragon cards that were already played there. And if you have the knights and you get two knights down, then you get to take both of the knight cards. And you're going to be placing these out, and you're just playing these cards in order to collect other cards, and it's triggering things on the board. And it's just a nice back and forth game where you're just trying to score points by collecting these cards, and it just works really well. This is a game that's been out of print for a while. I think it'd be really cool if it came back because it's kind of older, and I think it's just a really cool kind of streamlined back and forth game where you're just taking some cards and playing a card, and it has some really interesting jockeying for position on that. So this is Dragonheart. Check it out. I like this one. My number 9 game also comes in this little size box, and this is called Corinth. This is a roll and write game from Days of Wonder from a couple years ago, and this is essentially the roll and write version of an older game from Istari called Yispahan, and that was a game that had these fun little camel pieces, and it was a dice game. You're rolling dice, and you would put them out on this board, and you're going to be drafting the dice off of that board and taking actions. And in this roll and write game, you're going to, again, roll the dice. You're going to sort them out on the board based off of value, and then you take actions based off of the slot on the board that they're on, and you can take the actions based off the number of dice that you pull. And so you're essentially trying to cross off different boxes on this sheet, and you're trying to get to different places. There's a couple different mini games on your sheet that you're trying to accomplish on here, and it just works. It's not a light roll and write game, but it's not really super heavy like a Three Sisters or a Hadrian's Wall or something like that. It's probably more of a middleweight game, but it really captures the interesting dice drafting and kind of manipulation there that's in Yispahan, only in a more compact package. It kind of, I mean, Ispahan, I don't know if we'll ever get republished, but this one kind of takes its place, and I think it does it really well in a nice tight package. So check out Corinth if you're into roll and write games, but also if you're into like those more dice driven Euro games. Also really solid. Now, one of my favorite games to come out last year also came out in this size box too, and that is Great Plains. And this is the first of a couple games that are in the Lookout Games two-player line, which kind of mimics the old Cosmos two-player line. And this is from the designers Trevor Benjamin and Brett Gilbert, and this is essentially kind of area control style game for just 2 players, and you're going to have this hex board that is between the 2 players, and you're placing either one team as snakes, one person as foxes, and you're placing these pieces out on the board on certain colored hexes that on the field spaces you can't place on the mountains. You're placing them on the field spaces, trying to have majority of these different fields. And there's also these little bonus actions. So if you place near these different symbols on the board. You also get to collect these kind of bonus tiles that you get to then maybe place a little further than another one, or jump over something, or push someone off the board. And so there's just some really cool push and pull with that, with a 2-player area majority game, which I don't know if is usually the best player count for most area control, area majority games, but this one works really well, and this might be my favorite to play with 2 players. So this one is really solid. If you're into area majority type games, check out Great Plains. And my number 7 game, and a lot of these games are 2-player games because they got the Cosmos player 2-player line, you got the Lookout 2-player line. Corinth was not a 2-player game that can play with a bunch of players. This next one also plays with a bunch of players, and this is Draftsaurus. Little thicker, but still same size square box. And this is a very popular game from a couple years ago, and this is a drafting game in which you are not drafting cards. A lot of these games you're drafting cards, but in this one you are drafting little wooden dinosaurs. And you have this bag of dinosaurs that you're passing around the table. Probably not great for COVID, but we're almost there. And we're going to be pulling them out of this bag. And each player has a different board, and there's different sections on your board that you're going to be putting these dinosaurs on. Some sections want the same dinosaurs, some sections want pairs of dinosaurs, some sections want all different kinds of dinosaurs, that kind of thing. And then by the end of each round, you're going to score your sections and see who scored the most points based off of your dinosaur park. And it's just a nice, streamlined, fun game, but it has some really nice tactile pieces to it where you're passing this bag around, pulling stuff out of it, and it has a nice toy factor also because the pieces are just so much fun. It's super colorful, super inviting, really great welcoming game, and also plays really quick, good for a filler game or something like that. So Draftsaurus, really awesome game that happens to come in the same size box as Lost Cities. And then to round off the top, the first 5 games is Indulgence. This is another game that does not play with 2 players. In fact, you can't play this with 2 players. It's 3 or 4 players. This is a trick-taking game. And I would say this is not my favorite trick-taking game, but it is one of my favorite trick-taking games. And this game is by Restoration Games. It was an older game, something dragon, something or other. And this one now has kind of an interesting religious theme to it, which you don't often see in games. And it kind of takes the idea of hearts, where you can shoot the moon and score a bunch of points by not collecting anything. This one, it gives you, each round you kind of have the option to kind of shoot the moon and go all in on something or all out on something. And it's just it takes that and just kind of takes that whole idea of shooting the moon and hearts and just kind of runs with it and makes it super interesting and rotates the different objectives for each round for those extra scoring points. It has some really cool bits. It's got the real chunky gems to it. It has a really silly ring, like a Godfather or like a class ring, a Super Bowl ring in here. That's like a first, the player marker or whatever. So it's got a cool production value to it, but it's just a really clever just trick-taking game that plays really well for folks that have played trick-taking games before. It's probably not a great intro one, but really enjoy this one, and it comes in the box. My next game is also part of the older Cosmos 2-player line, and this is a newer version of an older one that was in that line, Hera and Zeus. And this is called Thunder and Lightning, which is the newest edition of it, I believe. And this is almost again, a 2-player game, and it's almost like Stratego, the card game. And Stratego is an old board game where you're going to have these pieces that you don't necessarily know what their powers are, what their strengths is, and you're moving back and forth on this kind of grid with these pieces trying to take out your opponent, but you don't necessarily know how strong their opponents are. And in this one, it is a card game in which you're going to be placing these cards on your side, and your opponents are placing cards on their side, and it's kind of a battle, kind of a tactical battle game where you are going to be able to fight the cards in front of you, but the cards are often face down, so you don't necessarily know what you're going to battle. So depending on what their strength is, depending on what your strength is, and depending on what the different powers are, it might knock out certain cards, or it might move certain cards and protect other things. It plays really well. It's by Richard Borg, who does some bigger kind of war more combative type games, and this one kind of boils that down really well to a card game. So really great game, has a cool kind of was it Norse mythology kind of game theme with like the Loki versus Odin type thing. So really cool. Enjoy this one. Thunder and Lightning. And next, I I called the list, games that are in the same box as Lost Cities, because that's a super popular game and people know what that size is. But I also super like Lost Cities, so it's on my list too. And this is my number 4 game on this list. And this is a game that this is an older copy of it, and it's really beat up. It has, all my cards, all the black borders on my cards are really worn. The box itself is kind of bowed and it has seen better days. And this is a game that my wife and I have played a lot. My daughter and my oldest daughter and I have played this to death. She doesn't like to play a ton of games with me, but she really likes to play Lost Cities. And so it's just if you haven't played Lost Cities before, it's just a card game in which you're going to have this shared board, but you're essentially almost, you're trying to collect sets of cards out in front of you of the same colors in ascending order. So you have to play the cards in order, but you also have this middle section where you can kind of slough off cards and place them there, but your opponent then has the opportunity to take them into their hand and place them in front of them. So it's a really interesting back and forth game that doesn't have a ton of confrontation. You're kind of playing your own game, but there's enough interaction in that middle space that really makes it interesting and keeps you both engaged in what each other is doing. So Lost Cities, it's a classic for a reason, and it's still awesome and one of my favorite games. And then a game that I like just a smidge better than Lost Cities, and it does have some similar DNA, and that is a game called Trombon. I feel like this is a game that I might be the only person that really loves this game, but this is a 2-player game in the lookout line of 2-player games, and it has some of the same feels as Lost Cities, where you're kind of trying to put cards out in that ascending order to score points, and there's some multipliers as well, just like in Lost Cities. But this one has a little bit more to it. The cards are multi-use, so the cards can either be used as money, they can be used as the passengers in the middle of the table, or they could be used as the tram stops that you're collecting on the different trolleys in front of you that's ultimately going to score. But one of the most interesting parts in this game, it's one of my favorite things in games that I wish more games would include, is player-controlled timing when it comes to scoring or end game. And in this one, you have to play cards to the middle of the table in these different colored rows. And once one of those colored rows reaches 4 cards, you have to score that color. And both of you score all of your train lines of that color. And once you get to a certain number of scoring levels, the game ends. And so the players have full control over when scoring is going to happen. And so you might not want that one to score because you know your opponent's going to get it. They're going to score more points than you are. You might want to go all in on something because you already have 2 blue lines and your opponent doesn't have any blue lines, and you're just like, I want to score all the blue lines I can, so they don't score any points and you're scoring all these points. And that part of the game I think is the most interesting part, where the players are jockeying for when scoring is going to happen because you want to do it in the time of the game that's going to benefit you the most. So that is Trombon. Fantastic game, one of my favorites. It has some similar DNA to Lost Cities, but just is a little different. It's probably a step or 2 up from Lost Cities in complexity, but I really enjoy this one. My last 2 games. This one was a recent game. This one is a 2-player game, but also plays 3 players, and that's Land versus Sea. It is thicker, but it is the same. It is the same size, same size, I promise. And this is a tile laying game, very similar to Carcassonne in how in its core. But instead of square tiles, it's going to be hex tiles, and one player is building land and one player is building sea, but all the tiles are going to have both. So no matter how you play, you're ultimately kind of helping or trying to hinder what your opponent is playing, depending if you're land versus sea, right? And it just works super interestingly. And then even the 3-player mode, which I slept on for a little bit, but it includes this cartographer who is trying to score a little differently. They're not scoring just land, not just sea, and it works really well. It has an interesting look. I like how the artwork looks and comes together. It just has a nice style to it, and it's very smooth. Like it just, even the rules, how to play, it's just on the back of the box because it has so few rules. Take a tile into your hand, place a tile out onto the board. If you've completed that section, you score it based off of the number of tiles in that section. That's it. There's some modules in here to ramp the complexity, which I think makes things probably a little bit more interesting, but you can play it straight and it's awesome. So Land versus Sea, really awesome tile laying game in this small box size. And my favorite game in this small box size is a 2-player game, of course, and it's also in the Lookout game line. And if you follow me outside the Dice Tower, you know how much I like this game. I play this game all the time. This is one of my all-time favorite games, and that is Mandala. Also from the team that did Great Plains, from Trevor Benjamin and Brett Gilbert. This is a card game. What is so interesting about this game, most card games, so Trombon, for instance, had multi-use cards. You got the cards for the passengers, you got cards as money, you got cards as trolley stops. This game, the cards only have one use, and there's only one piece of information on each of those cards. It is just a color. That is it. There's nothing else on the cards. There's no numbers, there's no suits, there's no categories, nothing. It is just strictly color. And you're going to have these 2 areas on this cloth board in which you are trying to jockey how you're placing these cards out. You're going to ultimately draft the cards that are in the middle of each section in front of you, between you and your opponent, and those are going to give you ramping point values depending on when in the game you draft them. The cards that you draft earlier in the game are worth fewer points than the cards you draft later in the game. And so you want to be able to you have to be very mindful and cognizant about when those different colors are coming out and when you're going to be able to take those and monitor what your opponent is doing, because you don't want them to get super high valued cards either. So really, it can be a really thinky game for such a simple kind of rule set where you really just play a card. I can play a card here, I can play a card here, or I can maybe draw a card. And that's like, it's such a simple core to it, but so much kind of possibility and decision space within that. Mandala, fantastic game in this small box size. Well, there you have it. There's lots of games in this box size that I kind of arbitrarily picked for this video, but I mean, there's other games even in the background of this video that I really enjoy that are in that box size. So why don't you share some in the bottom? I know a lot of people are probably going to say Targi, which I've never played Targi, and I know I need to play it. It's just one that there's so many games, and I just missed out on that one. But that's probably my biggest regret for this video. But I know I have played these 10 amazing games, and I hope you enjoy them if you can track down some of the older ones or the newer ones if you can find them. So good, so good. But I'm Jordan. I hope you enjoyed talking about games in small square boxes. I'm Jordan. Thanks.